When looking into the Bronze Age collapse, some of the first things that come to mind when an average person looks into this topic is that the Sea People were a significant factor in what helped cause the destruction of so many large and powerful empires. And I would say that you're not wrong, but also not right. What I mean by this is that while the Sea People do play a role in the collapse, I could only say that they were just a part of a perfect storm of events that would, in the end, destroy so many long-living empires. A look into the ancient world would have you think that they were not as connected as we are today, with our incredibly globalized world. But that's where you would be wrong. The New Egyptian Kingdom, the Hittite Empire, the Assyrian Empire, and the Mycenaean kingdoms had created a complex amount of trade routes that were needed for the survival of each of the kingdoms. These different kingdoms each brought something to the table. The Assyrian land was the breadbasket of the ancient world, where they grew many cereal crops, particularly barley, which was made for flour and beer. They were vital for feeding large parts of the ancient world at that time. Now, the New Egyptian Kingdom also had large amounts of agriculture along the Nile, but the southern half of the kingdom had gems, gold, and silver. And while these vast amounts of mines gave them great wealth, the minerals to have at the time were tin and copper, which of course made bronze. Bronze was the main item made in tools, weapons, and many other important aspects of life at this time. The Hittites lived in the mountains of Anatolia, which happened to be important areas for mining copper and tin. The Mycenaean kingdoms were a more specialized people as they produced many luxury items such as carved gems, jewelry, vases, precious metals, and glass ornaments, to name a few. As you can see with the complex network of trade that was established, when one of these fails, it can lead to a whole network starting to fall, as these kingdoms depended on each other for these supplies. But this was just one part of the perfect storm to hit the Bronze Age kingdoms. Nothing destroys a nation like natural disasters. And in 2014, from Israel and German researchers had found core samples taken from the Sea of Galilee, and they had determined that from 1250 to 1100 BC was, quote, the driest of the entire Bronze Age, or in other words, a mega drought. And if you also did not know, the Mediterranean has lots of earthquakes, which continue to build up on top of the already devastating mega droughts that were occurring. The grain-producing kingdoms, including the Assyrians and Egyptians, were largely spared from the mega drought due to them being next to the Nile and Tigris River. But at this time, this meant that fewer grains were being produced, which limited the whole region's ability to feed their own people and export that grain to other kingdoms. At the same time, in places like Cyprus and in the Hittite mountains, there were mines that were running out of necessary minerals to create bronze. This creates an even bigger gap for such things as farming, warfare, and mining. The region-wide drought and mining predicaments led us into one of the most famous and likely final nail in the coffin of the many Bronze Age kingdoms. Nobody truly knows where the so-called Sea People came from, but most historians would agree with the major drought and disasters that exploded in and around this region made for a large amount of people looking for better lands. It seems that the dangerous and fierce Sea People could have been just a large amount of refugee-type people just looking for better lives. And after being subject to natural disasters, these people seem to have brought on an even bigger strain on the already failing system. The first kingdoms to fall were the Greek Mycenaeans, which were the first domino to fall. This wave of refugees seemed to have spread to the other kingdoms, causing them to be overloaded with already existing problems. One by one, the kingdoms losing access to each other's trading and resources, too began to fall. The only kingdom that seemed to be able to weather the storm was the Egyptians, which did write that their pharaoh at the time, Ramses III, led a successful defense against the Sea People attacked. Though they survived, it it was in a much weakened state. An interconnected system, natural disasters, resources disappearing, and an invasion of people created the perfect storm, as I'd like to say, that combined to help the downfall of some of the biggest civilizations at that time. The Mycenaeans and Hittites both suffered a complete collapse, and with about only 1% of the people that could really read or write, their knowledge was completely lost. The Egyptians and Assyrians faced a tough road ahead, but did not face such complete collapse as the other kingdoms. In those places that faced collapse, it took centuries for writing to come back, as for an example in Greece, where it took the Phoenicians bringing their alphabet for writing to make a comeback. And though the Bronze Age had ended, this led to new adaptations by the surviving kingdoms, which included the widespread use of iron.